It would be very, very difficult for any prime minister in any circumstances.
That's our political correspondent, Chris Mason. Now, the gunman wanted for the attack on a Christmas market in the French city of Strasbourg has been killed in an exchange of fire with the police. The French Interior Minister said a patrol found Sheriff Chakat wandering through the streets in the Neudorf district of the city. When they tried to question him, he began shooting and they retaliated and shot him dead. 3 people have died following the shooting at the market on Tuesday. Olivier Guitta is Managing Director of Global Strat, which is a geopolitical risk and security consultancy firm. And he told me what we know about Sheriff Chakat.
So Sheriff Chakat was on the radar of the security services for a while in the police. He's what you may call a petty criminal. He started being arrested by French police back when he was 13, and he had a long history of violence, and he represents exactly what you can imagine between the nexus between crime and terrorism, and he got radicalized in jail and therefore was put on the terror watch list back in 2015. So it wasn't surprising, unfortunately, that he went over to the Christmas market after he knew that the police was after him.
Are you surprised about how long it took to hunt him down?
Yes, very much so. When you look at what happened, I mean, we don't know the real particulars, but he was shot by military personnel, and he was wounded, and he fled. And for a full 48 hours, the police was clueless, and security services asked where he was. The first idea was that he had gone to Germany, where he had a history there, and he was arrested a couple of times. But the police had to issue something that is extremely rare in the case of France, a call for the population to help and call in with information because they had no idea where it was. He ended up being in his old digs, where he probably hid for 48 hours. But keep in mind, he had 700 police officers looking for him. So I'm a little dumbfounded as how long it took for somebody that was wounded, that had his face on TV for a full 2 days to find him.
You mentioned Germany there. As he had committed crimes in Germany as well as France, and he was known to the authorities in both countries, which of those 2 countries will take the blame for any mistakes and omissions in keeping tabs on him?
France. And actually, you raise a good point. He was actually arrested in 3 countries, so France, Germany, and Switzerland. And in Germany, he had committed hold-ups and in the Frankfurt region back in 2012. But in terms of keeping tabs, the French put him on that watch list in 2015. We know, as we've discussed many times in the past, that there are 20,000 people on the terror watch list, and obviously the security services cannot focus on a lot of them. But they knew that he was part of that radical jihadist scene within Strasbourg, and knowing that Strasbourg is one of the main hubs of jihadists in France, he should have been monitored extremely closely, because most of the people that he were hanging out with ended up going to Syria and Iraq to join Islamic State there.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because for a while, as you say, there was a question mark as to whether he had escaped to Germany. Do security services from different countries not share information, the kind of information that would have ensured that he couldn't slip from one country to another as easily as that?
You're exactly correct. I mean, that's also one of the concerning aspect of the whole story, is the fact that they thought that he basically slipped while he was known by both security services, which raises the question of cooperation 3 years after the attack in Paris, where there was blame going on between France and Belgium as far as the cooperation and as far as giving information. It looks like there might have been a mishap as well there. So is it structural issue? That could be. I mean, we've seen in the past, unfortunately, uh, even in the case of the London Bridge attack, that Italian security services had provided information about the jihadists to the UK, and that information, for one reason or another, was never acted upon. So it's difficult to say what had transpired, but unfortunately, the whole story doesn't look very reassuring.
And is there anything to be made of the fact that this is yet another Christmas market attack? People might remember the Christmas market attack in Berlin. It was a couple of years ago now. But this is another one. It does seem as if Christmas markets are... I don't want to put people off going to them, but at the same time, do you see where I'm going with this? This is another
Yes.
attack on a Christmas market.
So there are a few things that one has to remember. The Christmas market in Strasbourg is one of the most famous in the world, and was a target in 2000 by members of an Algerian terrorist group that was linked to Al Qaeda later on, that had plotted to attack the market over Christmas. And thanks to MI5 information given to the French, they were able to dismantle that cell before they went through with their attacks. One thing that is extremely important to understand is that jihadists have an obsession with Christian holidays. So whether it's Easter or Christmas, there have been calls by different groups, from Al Qaeda to Islamic State, to target what they call infidels during their high holiday season. So it's always for security services. Both Easter and Christmas are extremely volatile period, and they're even more on the lookout, if you will, than the rest of the year.
Are we in a safer environment now, given the virtual dismantling of Islamic State, for example?
Yes and no. The problem is really an issue with the sheer number of radicals that live in our countries, whether France, Germany, or England. They have about the same amount of people that are on those lists and that are potential terrorists. We're talking about 20,000 people. So whether Islamic State has lost territory or not, it doesn't really, in a way, affect those kinds of attacks that we have seen in the past 2 years. Much more crude attack from one or two individuals, not planned, not sophisticated, really. But that links up to any kind of jihadist group. And remember that Islamic State was extremely smart in basically coming up with the idea of the caliphate, and that concept that was bringing about having a homeland around for Muslims around the world, but at the same time saying, look, if you live in the UK or France, you don't need to go to Syria or Iraq. You can just take a car, take a knife, and go and kill as many infidels as possible. So, unfortunately, we're not really safer, because in terms of what we've seen and what the security services have to deal with in terms of threat, it has never been as high as today.
How will Brexit affect the sharing of security information then?
That's a good question. I would put to you that I think Brexit will not really change anything, because most of the exchange of information has been from country to country rather than going through Europe and through Europol, which is the main police information sharing system for the EU. The relationship that exists, the personal relationship that exists between people in counterterrorism units around Europe will not change because of Brexit. The British head of counterterrorism unit will still be able to call his friend in Paris, in Berlin, and get the information directly, which is usually what they do. They never go through Europe because it takes a lot more time. It's very administrative, and there is always the potential of leaks when a lot of the people know about a sensitive operation. So I don't think in that matter that Brexit will be very problematic in the future.
In summing up, what are the lessons to be learned by the security forces after this Strasbourg Christmas market and the perpetrator, Sheriff Shakat? What are the lessons to be learned from this and him?
A couple of things. One of the aspects that is extremely important is that, unfortunately, in the past 3 years, about 70 to 80% of the terrorists were known to the security services. They were put on a list. They were there, so security services were extremely good at picking the potential people. The problem remains human intelligence. Possibly some people around Shekat knew that he was planning of doing something and didn't come forward, or the security forces didn't have any kind of human informant or a mole, if you will, within those groups. And that's what makes the difference, because obviously they cannot follow 20,000 individuals at one time. The maximum they could follow, range in the 100 to 200 people. So they have to make choices. But in order to find out who's the person that could be on the verge of carrying out an attack, they need to have that human intelligence inside. And this is not done overnight. It's going to take a full 5 to 10 years to rebuild what was before one of the major advantages of French security services was the human intelligence.
That's Olivier Guitta there of the security consultancy firm Global Strat. After the news and sport, we'll hear from Sir Richard Branson on what was a remarkable day for him in terms of space exploration. But first, let's get the latest 5 Live headlines. Here's Claire Bailey.
On digital, BBC Sounds, smart speaker and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Theresa May has told EU leaders she firmly believes a route can be found for her Brexit deal to